Welcome to Inspirational Journeys, everyone. My name is Ann Harrison, and today I have two guests with me. Marlena, and I'm going to butcher your last name. Fiol?
Good luck.
Fiol.
Fiol. Okay, sorry. Marlena, Fiol, and Ed O'Connor. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Ann. It's good to be here.
Thanks, and tell Patricia I said thanks for reaching out to me. And so why don't you introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started.
All right. Well, I think I might as well start from the beginning. I grew up on a Low German Mennonite leprosy compound in Paraguay, South America, that my parents founded the year I was born. My father was my hero. He did great things. We can talk about that in a bit. In the medical world, as well as just generally for society, particularly in Paraguay, South America, but had ramifications around the world. So I thought he was a hero. I also was a very rebellious, sinful child, and I rebelled against the confines of the Mennonite church. I rebelled against his as a brutal disciplinarian. He beat me, and I rebelled against that. At the age of 10, I was sent to the capital city of Asunción, and I was basically without any supervision. And you can only imagine what a rebellious kid at the age of 10 in a big city without supervision, what that leads to. And it was not particularly pretty. I'm just going to fast forward here. I escaped to the US when I was 19. But Anne, as you and your viewers and listeners know, we don't ever really escape from our own troubles and our own demons. And so I basically went from one disaster to another, and finally I hit rock bottom. And for me, what that meant was that I no longer even had anger. I was broken. And it was from that place of brokenness that really I was able to reach out to my father, and he as well had some hard knocks. And it was in that place of vulnerability that he and I were able to reconcile. And so my memoir, which we may or may not want to speak more about later, but it's Nothing Bad Between Us. A Mennonite missionary's daughter finds healing in her brokenness. And it is basically a story about forgiveness and reconciliation, and how when we show up from our most vulnerable place, reconciliation and forgiveness becomes possible. So that's kind of the early, big, broad brush of the early years. I then went on and received an MBA in business and a PhD in business administration. Fast forward, I had a very successful career. 30 plus years ago, I met my soulmate and my best friend and my partner, Ed O'Connor. We have been writing together in the business world for decades, but in the last 6-7 years, we have been doing research and writing the second book about Dr. John and Clara Schmidt, my parents. And that book is called, and it is a 60-year saga based on 740 written sources of documents, sources of information, that documents their lives from a very different perspective. It is not a daughter's look at her parents. Rather, it is a sweeping saga of these two people and what they were able to accomplish in Paraguay and the ramifications around the world.
Wow.
Wow.
Ed, do you want to add something to that?
Is there anything left to add? I mean, we're among the overeducated in our society, and the education we have which trained us to be university professors and consultants and speakers in the healthcare industry, that education is pretty useless.
Yeah.
Stumbling into writing, which is really, I know what your audience is I think made up of, are writers and aspiring writers. And so we decided to be aspiring writers 5-6 years ago.
I want to just clarify that he's talking about literary writing.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of publishing in the business world, but it wasn't until I began writing my memoir, and then we wrote Called, and now we're writing a third book, that we are engaged in writing literary fiction and nonfiction.
Oh, wow, cool. So you're actually starting to work on some literary fiction too?
We are, that is our third book, which we can jump to now, or you can grill us about it later.
We could come back to that because that's kind of interesting. And I may have you back on the show once you get it published to talk more about that, because that's gonna be amazing. So let's start with what inspired you both to become writers.
I think we got bored with our careers, our very successful, fortunately, careers as academics, university professors, and looked around and said, well, what's next? And I was sitting on the couch in our home, it happened to be a home in Tucson, Arizona at the time. And Marlena's sitting at her computer, pecking away at her keys, and said, would you listen to this? I just want to share with you. And she's writing about her early life. And it's coming right off her fingertips. And it was good.
Actually, it came out of my heart.
Well, it comes out of your heart through the fingertips. That's the truth. Said, that is good. We need to do more of that. And so that set us on this path.
That ended up being the first scene in the memoir, that little piece that I read to him so many years ago.
I had no idea she could write that kind of material.
Wow, when God gives it to you, it always comes out better than you expect.
That is the truth.
Isn't that the truth?
That is well said.
If we get out of the way, right, Ann?
Yep, I'm notorious for that myself. I'm a writer. I'm actually working on some children's fantasy myself. So instead of the mystery I had set aside, because that's probably going to I'm going to probably rework that one too. But anyway, that's beside the point. Sometimes I have to get out of my own way. Just write the thing.
Yep, that's the truth.
I'm going to add just one more thing to what Ed said about why we're writing these books.
Okay.
This is a story worth telling. This is a story, whether it's the memoir, which is a story of forgiveness and reconciliation, or whether it's Called, which is a sweeping saga of service and giving one's life to the benefit of others. I think today more than ever, our world longs for these kinds of stories, longs to be inspired, to get beyond the anger and the divisiveness and the frustrations and the illnesses that we experience in our world today. So there's stories that are truly worth telling, and that is the bottom line of what has motivated us to keep doing this.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, those stories need to be told. So tell me a little bit about your memoir. What inspired you to write that?
Well, it began as me journaling for my own healing. And as Ed said, I just kind of at one point said, hey, can I read you something that I've just been journaling here? And that's when he said, wow, this is a story you need to share with the world. And so I began publishing essays, short versions of the story, and my early readers validated that this story was touching their hearts. I mean, think about it. I grew up in a Low German Mennonite leprosy station in Paraguay, South America. Now, you might say, what could this have to do with anybody who's reading the memoir? How could they possibly relate? And the truth is, that memoir has brought people out of the woodworks coming to me and saying, thank you for telling your story. This has made me, and fill in the blanks, and it has inspired people to look at their own relationships in their lives, to look for forgiveness and reconciliation. And so it would seemingly be a book that has very little to do with readers in the US in 2022, and yet we have learned that that is not true.
Wow, because you're not, I mean, yeah, you had to find your own way, your own healing through writing that memoir. But there are so many people out there who are even in the US, who are in similar situations.
That is correct.
Absolutely
That is
true.
correct. That is correct. We're all on the same journey in some ways, aren't we?
Yeah, and I heard on another podcast, and I have to share this because this was absolutely amazing. Marianne Williamson, I think her name was, or Marianne Williams. I don't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. She said, we are the faucets, not the water. We all have one message. We just have our own unique way of sharing it.
That's right.
I thought, wow.
Absolutely true.
Well said.
We're all
That
headed
was-
up the same mountain, and we have different ways of climbing, but it's
Right.
different stuff coming out of the faucets, but all the same stuff.
Yep. We're the faucets, not the water. Like in what was it, John 15 verses 1-7. In John 15, it says, I am the vine, ye are the branches.
Yeah.
Yep. It's another way of saying the same
Yep.
thing.
Yep. Exactly. What she said brought me back to that verse. So what was the inspiration behind Called? Which I'm gonna be honest, I haven't finished reading it yet.
It's a character-driven, extraordinary story of two medical pioneers whose selfless service changed the world. These people, I mean, it's a story worth telling, is another way of saying what Marlena has just been going over. It is a story of people who changed the way leprosy is treated on the planet. Rather than locking people up, they treated them in their homes. They've been recognized by the American Leprosy Mission as having changed how that illness, that stigma, is treated on the planet. In addition, these two people also saved communities in Paraguay. They are missionaries who were inspired by their faith, but they were just so passionate that they kept driving forward to help other people.
The book begins during World War II and tells the almost fantastical story of Nazi activism among Mennonites in Paraguay. So there were Mennonites who fled from the Ukraine. It's a story that's particularly interesting to people today because of what we are seeing happening in the Ukraine. But these Mennonites fled from the Ukraine in the 1920s, and they landed in Paraguay. And
they landed in Paraguay because it was the only country that would accept them with all of the illnesses that some of these people carried.
So
that's why Paraguay.
So they were refugees almost 100 years ago, sort of mirroring a lot of what we're seeing today in the Ukraine.
And the refugees streaming out.
That's where the book begins. In 1941, Dr. Schmidt landed in Paraguay. And if you've started the book, you've read that part. And he had to deal with Nazi uprisings because these people still had a German identity. And so they hoped that Hitler would win the war and they could get out of Paraguay and get back to their farms in the Ukraine. And then, of course, the story goes on from there. But
and Dr. John came out of Kansas. He was a US citizen and he did not hold that perspective. He held the perspective of the United States.
Well, and he was a Mennonite pacifist who strongly believed in being a conscientious objector.
And therefore, the story in these early days in the Chaco, the wild western part of Paraguay, has clashes in it between people who are pacifists. Well, that's pretty strange and unusual, but it nevertheless took place.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be honest, there were times when I thought, well, I'm gonna put this down so I can read something else. It slows down, then it picks back up. I'm like, I can't. I just can't. because
Yeah.
because the tension just is heightened, and I'm like, wow, it's a really good book, and it may be a nonfiction, but in places it reads like a novel.
Yeah, you know, it's in some
Well said.
people have told us you can't make up this stuff.
No, you can't.
And as Marlena said, it has 740 references that we actually cite supporting what's written in the book, and many, many, many other references we went through that we just put aside.
I will just.
So it's well documented.
I'm sure, Anne, that you probably give people websites in your show notes, but let me just mention here that we have a web page that is devoted to Called, and it is calledasaga.com. So CALLED, a saga.com, and it includes descriptions of the book. It includes people who have given us reviews. It includes a list of the references, as well as a bunch of photographs, and it's really worth taking a look at if people are interested in knowing more about the book.
I was going to ask you about the writing process. I know you had to. It sounds like you had to do a lot of research to write this kind of book with the conflict between the community, the colony in the Chaco, and
Yeah.
like George Clawson, the dentist, and that sounds like
Yeah.
it took a lot of research. Did you outline it first, or?
Yeah, well, this is where our background as academic researchers actually did come in handy, because research has been part of our lives for many, many decades. But Ed was the major researcher in this process, and for 7 years he pulled together books, articles, letters written to and from Dr. John and Clara Schmidt, diaries. We have so much material. I should back up here a bit and say that before my mother died in 2010, she asked me, she said, Marlena, you are my writer. I want you to tell our story. And she handed me boxes of materials that outline not only their very active outer lives, but documented so much of their inner lives from letters and diaries. And so Ed took this on.
So we combined that personal information with digging through archives, library archives, and we were helped by librarians in several locations who have significant documentation about the two main characters, John and Clara Schmidt. We also interviewed people who remembered them in various locations.
They've come out of the woodwork.
Oh yeah, people, I want to tell you a story about them. I worked on their station when they were running that leprosy station. It's like, wow.
So many people that we've never heard of, have never met, don't know anything about, are emailing us and sending notes about their experience with John and Clara Schmidt, or their experiences of supporting the work that John and Clara did. So it's been extremely gratifying, to say the least. The
main supporter of the work in Paraguay for many of the years, for many of the 60 years, was the Mennonite Central Committee. And at one point in time, I came across the letter from the Mennonite Central Committee saying, John and Clara Schmidt are the only two missionaries who raise more money than they spend. These were incredible fundraisers who would come north every 4, 5, 6 years and travel around the United States and Canada, visiting communities that were supportive of their work.
And telling stories about their work in Paraguay and raising funds for the work. Yeah.
We used to teach master's classes in business, and in one of those executive program classes, one of the students whom I had previously had Marlena at a later point in time in the program and said, oh, now that you've told me about yourself, I know my parents used to send money to your parents in order to keep that leprosy station going.
This isn't a business executive program in Colorado, right? It had nothing to do with
out of nowhere
Yeah.
come these people.
Wow.
Well, anyway,
That's amazing. I mean, it's like, so basically you had the material, the people to talk to and all that there. You just had to put it together in a book.
Just had to put it together in a
Well,
book.
yes, good, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
it was
no
all,
small task.
did you outline it before you started writing it, or did you just start sifting through and writing things down and compiling all the
Yeah.
information?
Yes.
You know,
Both of the above.
writers are often asked, you know, do you have an outline, or are you what's called a pantser, where you're
Yeah, plotter,
sort of flying-
pantser, or plantser.
Exactly. And I would say that both are true. Absolutely. There was I mean, given that it's a true story, there was an arc of what actually happened that we had in mind. However, in the process of telling that story and utilizing the documents that we had that we were drawing from, a lot of that flowed without adhering to a strict outline.
So you were able to
Almost,
pants
almost, sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're fine.
It almost demanded that it be told. I mean, it's an extraordinary story of adventure and romance and political intrigue.
And service.
And it's the kind of book I would love to listen to if I hadn't written it. In fact, we have listened to it. I think you're an audiobook fan, and I have been.
Oh,
I've been into audiobooks since the late 1980s when there wasn't much available. I have something in my ear most all the time when I'm doing tasks.
So Anne, is it the audiobook that you're listening to?
No, actually, since Patricia sent me the PDF,
Okay.
I read Braille, and I have the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which is part of that's actually the Blind and Print Disabled now. That's our print handicap, whatever. They changed their name over the years. But anyway, they sent out these e-readers, which I got the HumanWare Brilliant one. And the e-reader translates the PDF into Braille. So I put it on the SD card and I load the thing. It takes a few minutes to load, and I can sit on my couch while I'm listening to podcasts. Although some people think that's a little bit weird because my brain works that way. I listen to podcasts or whatever, and I've been sitting there reading.
That's great. Well, I
want to interrupt for a second, because it sort of builds some relationship between Anne and I. My mother was legally blind in the late 1950s on into the rest of her life till 1990s. And one of the things that I got to do with her over the years when I'd visit or when I still live with her was pick out books from the Library from the Blind, I think was the name of it at that point in time. And they would send the big recordings that she could listen to, and later tapes. And so I'm very familiar with that service, and it made a big difference in my mother's life.
Now, if I want to get the audio versions or the talking books, I didn't even know the book was on Audible, honestly. But if I want to get, I'm sorry?
It is on Audible, yes.
Oh, wow. If I'd have known that, I'd have used my credit for that.
Yes, and I tell you what, the narrator is Jack Warren, and we cannot say enough good things about him. I will just say very briefly and not go too much on and on, because I could, about Jack Warren.
She gets excited about Jack Warren.
So this is not someone
I do too, really.
This is not someone we knew beforehand, but he became the narrator for our book. And when we were going through listening to his narration as we were reviewing his work to put the final okay on it, he had me in tears. Now, this is a book, the words of which we had written, and yet listening to him bring those words to life brought us to tears. It's truly a wonderful, if I may say so myself, it's truly a wonderful audiobook.
One of the things he does well, and that you will appreciate, Anne, is these characters go on for 60 years, and he actually aged the voices as the book went forward, from the young until an older version of these same people. He captured the characters beautifully.
Wow. And what's funny is that when I'm reading it in Braille, I can still picture, I can almost hear the voices in my head. But I'm going to have to, if I don't get the audiobook, since I'm reading it in Braille, I may still have to go and listen to a sample of it. just to hear how phenomenal it is. But no, what I was
You
going to say
can
is,
go,
ahead.
you can easily get a sample if you like. If you go to callasaga.com, there are audiobook samples on that website.
With Jack reading, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wonder, for the listeners, and well, I don't know about the viewers, but for the listeners, I wonder if I could get a downloaded sample that I can put on the podcast.
Yes, you absolutely can, and I will make sure you get it.
Okay, cool. Because that
Yep.
would be, at the end of the interview, I can say, here's a sample of Called, narrated, but yeah, I could do that and then just put it in the interview, because that would be really cool. Okay, so, but what I was going to say is,
Another thing Jack did really well, and then I will stop proclaiming his skills. The book it's written in English, but it has pieces like, phrases in Low German, phrases in traditional High German, phrases in a language called Guarani, which is spoken in Paraguay. And Jack managed to actually pronounce words in each of these languages in a way that satisfied my wife, who speaks these languages. A fairly remarkable talent to be able to do that.
wow, that's amazing. So what I was going to say was, as far as the NLS, before we got off on the Audible, now I have the app on my phone and on my iPad, and then I can download books on this e-reader right here. This right here.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so I have, and then I read Kindle, my Echo reads Kindles to me too. So I have multiple ways of reading, of enjoying books, but I digress. So tell me a little bit about what you're working on now.
Yes, we are working on a third book, and the working title is Healing the Wound, One Layer at a Time. It is a story that gives readers the craziest adventures of Dr. John Schmidt, the protagonist of Called, the adventures that didn't even make it into Called. However, it's his personal recollections of those adventures. And over time, of course, across the book, he begins peeling back the layers of his inner struggles that he was never able to take a look at when he was alive. So this man was a crazy soldier for Christ, and no matter what, he pushed forward and pushed through. He was a stubborn man, and he did not confront his own fears, his insecurities, his own demons. He never could do that. And so what we are doing is tracing his life through his recollections and slowly beginning to sort of peel back the barriers that he had all around himself, and not allowing himself to look at his own fears, his own insecurities. And the reason it is fiction is, even though we have many documents of his own personal diaries and writings, and we have many glimpses into his inner life, which is really one of a tragic hero in many ways. Even though we have that documentation, we cannot assume that we can write about someone else's soul. And so it has to be packaged as fiction based on a very true story of someone's life that made a huge difference in the world. And he was quite broken as an old man, because there was never an ability to look inside of himself.
Wow. And so you're writing that one in first person, right?
First person in the voice of Dr. John Schmidt. Yeah, great question.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Once that gets published, I'm gonna have to have you back on the show to revisit that one and unpack that a lot more, because I know I don't want to, do any spoiler alerts right now, and I'm sure you're still working through that, but let me know when you
Yeah.
get that done, because that's going
We'll
to
do
be
that.
an interesting book to unpack
Yeah.
and talk about even in more depth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do either of you have any tips or advice that you would like, any takeaways that you'd like the listeners and viewers to walk away with?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think what your listeners and viewers would appreciate is that we have published the first book, the memoir, with a publisher, Mango Publishing. We published the next book called as a self-published book.
Did not look for a publisher.
We didn't even look for a publisher. And so we have tried both. And often viewers and listeners are interested in the experience and how that differs. And so we could speak a bit to that if you'd like.
Sure.
So I would say publishing with a publisher, the upsides are they do the cover design, they do the editing, they do the design of the interior, they do they take care of the printing. And so there are a lot of tasks that one doesn't have to worry about with a publisher. However, what we have found is that a big downside is that you lose most control. And in today's environment, where it is so very possible to do this on our own, we have found that self-publishing gives us so much more freedom to do what we want to do. And there are so many services out there to help us with all of those tasks. And so upsides and downsides, but we've been very pleased. Actually, we've been pleased with both processes, but probably we would choose self-publishing at this point over going to a publisher.
We're a little bit on the control freak side, and being able to control the process ourselves is satisfying for sure. For us.
Now, when it came to, when it came to editing, did you hire a freelance editor, or how did that work?
We did hire an editor, actually with both books. We had professional editors take a look at them and give us feedback before ever submitting to the publisher. And in Called, we had a professional editor go through the whole thing before we ever started the publication process. Yeah, I would recommend that highly. Anyone who wishes to put a book out there, have a professional editor work on it. It's definitely worth the money to have it look and sound professional.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound like an awesome thing. Any final words for any final advice that you would like to share, Ed?
Well, we have kind of an unusual situation, and therefore I'm not sure how generalizable this is. We, as Marlena has said, were both university professors. We had offices next to each other. We wrote together. We had a consulting business together. We had a speaking business together.
And we were married.
Yeah, we slept together. I mean, this is a very integrated life. And so when we get to this part of our life, we write together, and we've done that for years. And that in some ways would be very difficult for many couples. For us, our process basically is, I do some of the research. Marlena writes the first draft. She sends it to me for review. I make commentary and changes.
And then we fight about it.
And then we fight about it. And we do fight about it. We are not...
We're
fiery people, I think, is an honest way to put it. And the product turns out to be better when we get done with our fighting about it.
Yeah.
And so that's our process, and it may or may not be generalizable to other people.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be doing this together.
Yeah, it's part of our life. We've worked together for so many years that we're actually a little afraid of not working together because it's an integral part of our connection, of our life together. And we're very fortunate to have found each other to live a life together. I don't know that that is helpful to people in general. I think something that I would say that we're doing wrong, but then that's us, is that what starts out with a memoir, it starts out with a whole world that we've left, then it goes to a memoir, then it goes to an epic true story, and now it's going to a novel. And why don't we become good at something? Because we're doing this for the fun of it. We're trying to make a difference in people's lives. We're trying to inspire others. We're trying to get stories out, and we're doing it for our own personal pleasure. I mean, talking to you is a pleasure. It isn't something that we need to do today. It's like, wow, what a possibility. Thank you.
And
So-
it's what I was going to say. Every process is different, and if it works for you, hey, there you go. Every solo writing process is different. Every collaboration is different, and all that good stuff. So, that's what. And if you're having fun while doing it, then I'll if it brings you joy, then all the better. So
we are sitting in an area as we speak to you, we're sitting in an area that we use for various purposes. One, to chat with people such as yourself during interviews. We also use this as a place where we record our YouTubes. We have a YouTube channel, had it for about a year, and that's another piece of something we're enjoying that we're learning how to do. We also do Tai Chi in this area, which is
It's a multi-purpose
space. We just move some things around. So that's all part of making this thing work, because if one doesn't have ways of communicating with the world, given there are, the last time I heard, about 1.6 million books a year published, nobody's going to know about your book unless you have ways of communicating with the world about it. And most publishers don't do a lot for you.
And marketing is one of the hardest parts of a creative business mindset or creative.
It really is.
You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So where can people find you online?
Absolutely. Well, I would say that there are two key websites. One is the home website, which is marlenafiol.com. That's MARLENAFIOL.com. And the other website is one that we've mentioned during this interview, and that is called asaga.com. And that's a web page devoted to the book Called. And hopefully, Anne, will you have those in some show notes?
I will, because Patricia sent me all of that information.
Good. And we will also, I will make sure that you get a clip of the audiobook.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So, and because this is a Christian-based podcast, I do like to ask, and if you're uncomfortable with it, either of the final questions, please do let me know. I would like to ask, is there a verse that you would like to, a Bible verse you'd like to share with us today?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead.
Well, it drove Dr. John's life. And it was so a part of our family that one of his grandchildren has it tattooed on his leg.
It's Micah 6:8. And can I say it from memory? Do you happen to know it, Anne?
No.
What is the ask of you?
What does the Lord ask of thee but to walk?
That's the end of it.
That's the end of it.
Seek justice.
Seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Micah 6:8.
And that's so much drove Dr. John's life.
Yes.
Wow.
And so it becomes a favorite of ours.
Thank you so much. Now, would either of you or both of you like to close us out in prayer?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Do you want to?
I think together, as she suggested. I mean, we are so grateful, Lord. We are aware of the many blessings that you have placed upon us.
And we also understand the responsibility that goes with those blessings.
We know we are unworthy, unable on our own to accomplish anything.
And we know, based on so many examples, including the example of Jesus, that even human that we are, and ordinary that we can do the extraordinary with God's help and
We
mercy.
thank thee for our blessings, for the blessings that you cast upon all of us. And may we be at our best in trying to carry out your work.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. So we challenge you today to go out there and read to get inspired, write something inspiring, and share your creation with the world. For when you've touched one life, you've touched thousands. Now, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And remember, your story matters. Now, stay tuned for a special audio clip of Called by Marlena, Fiol, and Ed O'Connor. If you are listening on the podcast, if you're watching this on YouTube, please do come on over to the podcast so that you can also enjoy that clip. Thanks so much for being with us today, and have a blessed day.